Hope you all had a good morning or whatever time of day it was when we did the morning session. Welcome to what is our, in Toronto, afternoon sessions, which include two panels, one about science fiction that you're attending right now, and the next one about graphic medicine, and a publisher's speed dating session. So take note that you can stay on this Zoom call for the two panels and then head over to the separate link for publishers speed dating at 4 p.m. Eastern. If you weren't with us for the morning sessions, I'm Lindsay Gibb, programming lead for TCAF Libraries and Education Day. The Toronto Comic Arts Festival and Libraries and Education Day acknowledges that we're all coming to this event from different lands and territories, but that TCAF is located on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original custodians of the land on which we live, work, and create. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities in Tekaronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. So our next panel is Good for Health, Better for Education, Science Fiction Comics. This one is live, so you'll see that the captioning is automated for this session. I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Angélique Roché, who will then turn us over to our panelists for their introductions. Angélique is an attorney, professional host, moderator, voiceover artist, actor, journalist, and content creator. As a writer and photographer, Angélique has contributed to NBC News, Black Girl Nerds, Sci-Fi Wire, Marvel.com, and Rewire News. She is currently the host of Marvel Entertainment's Marvel's Voices podcast, an on-air contributor and host of the podcast Brave New Pod and Geeksplain for Sci-Fi Wire, host of New York Public Radio's live monthly show and podcast Very Biggest Questions, and she's the creator and producer of her own live stream video conversation series and podcast Creative Quarantine. She also co-hosts the Radical Geeks and the Women of Marvel podcasts. Prior to working as a full-time consultant, Angélique created communications infrastructures for various organizations and campaigns. Most recently, she was the VP for External Affairs at the Ms. Foundation for Women. She has a BA in Mass Communications from Southern University and A&M College, as well as a Juris Doctorate from Southern University Law Center and a Legal Letters Master's from the George Washington Law School. So welcome, Angélique. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Out of all the things you just said, one of the things that I'm most excited about is that I am the daughter of a librarian. And so I am geeked to be here to talk about books, specifically talking about sci-fi and the power of sci-fi books and novels and graphic novels. And to be here with such incredibly folks. I would like each one of the folks who were here, but for those who are listening, we are here with Kim Hall, Jay Torres, and Sam Beiko, who are all such incredible folks who are going to be contributing to this conversation today. And I would love for each one of them to introduce themselves. And I will give each one of you an icebreaker question. Do you have a favorite character and how did you get into loving sci-fi? And we will actually start off with Sam Beiko.
Hello, yes, so thank you very much. My name is Sam Beiko. I write under SM Beiko, and I also am a professional editor. I've been working in the publishing industry in Canada and the US for about 11 years now. I started out as a young adult fantasy author. This is my trilogy, available from ECW Press. And where I crossed over professionally into comics was as an editor. So my most recent anthology that I did with Canadian comics publisher Renegade Arts is Gothic Tales of Haunted Futures, and that's kind of some of the context for what I'll be speaking about today. I'm also a comic creator. I am the artist and writer for Krampus is My Boyfriend, which is available for free on Webtoon. My favorite character, so I actually came into comics via manga. before I was more introduced to stuff on a wider, more commercial range. So I would have to say Nausicaa from Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, from the originals that were created by Hayao Miyazaki. It's very dark. It is nothing. It's like the movie, but there's just way more blood and just horror. And it's a really good sci-fi post-apocalyptic touch point. And that's me.
I love that though, because it shows the power of sci-fi and of books is that there's like it's wide reaching. Speaking of, Kim, I would love for you to introduce yourself next. Your work is just, it's so cool with the power of accessibility. So you next.
You're right, the power of accessibility. And this is possibly the best job in the world. I've got to say that. So I'm Kim Hall. I work at the Merrill Collection of Science Fiction, Speculation, and Fantasy at Toronto Public Library. I'm going to pitch the collection a little bit here too. We're one of the 3 largest science fiction collections in the world, and we are completely accessible to the public when, of course, in a normal world, we're open. And so anybody can come in and ask for any books. We also do for those teachers who are out there in the GTA, we do class visits, so you can contact us and we can do a presentation for you. So for myself, I started with science fiction, I don't know, with Space Cat and the Kittens, and got into a lot of text-based stuff, but I did start off with comics, and I think they were about $12 an issue, and that's what my allowance went on. And we were talking earlier, I preferred the DC just because at the time, the aesthetic I found more appealing, that Marvel was a bit clunkier. And as for favorite character, I would have to say it would probably have to be Wonder Woman from the early days, and being a DC character, yeah.
And last but certainly not least, Jay.
Hey everybody, my name is Jay Torres and I write comic books and graphic novels. I've been doing it for 15 years or so now, maybe closer to 20. I've kind of lost count. Lately, maybe in the last 5 years or so, I've focused on comic books and graphic novels for younger readers, although I've always been interested in writing for younger readers and getting kids to read comics. So one of my latest is Planet Hockey, work of science fiction for Scholastic. And I mean, I've worked on Rick and Morty. I worked on Wall-E in terms of, more science fiction-y type stuff. Legion of Superheroes for DC. And all sorts of stuff over the years, lots of stuff. I've done a lot of freelance as well as graphic novels. And in terms of favorites, it's so hard. I love me some robots and cyborgs and android types, and I've written about them too. This is the kids' graphic novel series that I write with artist Sean Dove. If I really had to choose, it would have to be Vision from Marvel. But if we had to go kind of, more leaning towards the science fiction side, oh man, this is hard. This is really hard, Angélique. I can't.
It's hard. Also, Vision technically, he's sci-fi, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. I would probably pick one out of Star Wars bots anyway. If not a Marvel robot. So R2, K2SO, Chopper. Any of those guys.
Love it. Also, it is very hard. There are decades and decades and decades of characters to choose from. So well job and well done to all of you. So I kind of want to start off with Kim, because we mentioned this idea of accessibility. We mentioned this concept of, falling in love with comic books. In your work, you have this opportunity to be like the front door, right? Like you have this opportunity to be the front door, but also to be the custodian of bringing a lot of these graphic novels in. For folks who understand sci-fi and graphic novels and pulp fiction, all the things that kind of fit in that genre, sci-fi can sometimes get, not a great name on being as serious as it really is, but it's such an inspiration for even modern technology. In your line of work, well, one, what brought you into this line of work? Because you were extremely excited about it, not just as a fan, but as a job.
Right.
Because there is a difference between being a fan and this is what I do. And then what have you kind of seen have been the trends in your work and in cultivating this type of collection so that it's accessible to everyone?
Well, we've got about 5,000 graphic novels, and it starts out, our previous collection had Lorna Toulis in the late 1980s, started to believe that graphic novels were going to be the next big thing and started collecting them fairly early on, around, you know, the late 1980s, when V for Vendetta, when Mouse came out, and The Dark Knight Returns, and they were starting to win some serious literary prizes and become more respectable, more recognized as an actual legitimate literary form. And from then, I think we had this was before I started, but about probably about 50 graphic novels, and it's grown to about 5,000 in about 25 years. And that may be the largest in a library in the world. I'm not really sure. And in terms of the trends over the time, you know, superheroes are going to be here always, as we know. The Marvel movie, the MCU is seeing to that. But I'm really seeing things are opening up, becoming more welcoming to broader authors and artists, creators in general, as well as characters. And I'm starting to see, for example, Jeff Lemire is writing 50% of everything that's out there, and pretty much half of what I process is Jeff Lemire. But we're seeing an awful lot of LGBTQ creators, Sophie Campbell, who I don't have any of her work up here, but love her stuff, very body positive. And she was identified as male at birth and has transitioned. And so there's one LGBTQ creator who, her characters are a broad variety of body types, male, female, gender non-conforming. So we're seeing a lot of opening up in that area. A lot of people of writers of color. I've hauled out a couple here. I'm going to be holding up stuff. So I saw, this is Cole Paul's Dakwakata Warriors. Saw him a couple of years ago at TCAF. And he's a First Nations author and illustrator. And he has written this to promote his community's language. And it's gotten broader readership, which he was never intending. It was just so that his community's language would not die. And it's now in libraries all over Canada. Good stuff. And if you get another chance to have him attend a TCAF, he's a great speaker. I was just amazed. He's so poised for someone so young. Another thing that I'm seeing is that writers of text-based books are writing their own original graphic novels. Once again, this is Margaret Atwood, Angel Catbird. So they're writing their own graphic novels. Once again, it's gotten to another plateau of respectability. And I'm also seeing older books that authors are involved in adapting, books from the 1980s that are now being adapted as graphic novels adapted by the original creator. I'm seeing an awful lot of horror. And I will say a lot of the trends that I'm seeing are true with text-based material. A lot of what we're getting in, a lot of writers are moving into horror. And I don't do horror, so processing it can be a challenge. But and one thing I like to do is, this is actually shows a couple of three different trends in one. House of Penance. And so horror, but it's also history. And this is one of the ways that I like to use it in, use this kind of material in presentations. I'll bring up a book that actually covers a number of different trends or topics in one book. So this is about the Winchester House, which anyone from the west coast of the US may have heard about the Winchester Mystery House. And the creator was the widow of the inventor of the Winchester repeating rifle. And she started building this house with corridors going nowhere, staircases going nowhere, doorways going nowhere. So this is a bit of history, but it's also horror, in that there's the possibility that possibly it was Cthulhu that caused the 1904 San Francisco earthquake. We're not sure. Definitely ghost stories. I recommend it.
And I love that. So I want to take a second. We do have a new panelist who just joined us, and I want to make sure he gets a chance to introduce himself. Our final panelist, Ronald. Hi. We had each one of our panelists give a little bit of their bio, and then also give us their favorite character. It doesn't have to be from comic books or graphic novels. It could be from a prose novel, preferably sci-fi, as a word it fits in. But please, and I want to take a second just to introduce our panelist.
Okay, sorry, folks. Apologies. Yeah, my name is Ronald Wimberly. I'm an animator, illustrator, cartoonist. I wrote Prince of Cats. I put out a newspaper called Lab Magazine. I did another book called Black History in Its Own Words. It's mostly quotes though, so I didn't really write that one. Yeah, so favorite character? I don't know the character's name, but it's probably the little girl from Otomo's book Domu, if I'm picking right now. Or maybe the children from Tekkon Kinkurito.
Word.
And it's supposed to be comics, right? So
it could be. We opened it up to prose because we had some not so strong. We wanted to make sure we were all inclusive. So all good.
Okay. Huh. Yeah, I'm still gonna go with that because I don't really do favorites anyway. So it's really just whatever's the first thing that comes to mind, right? Like, how do I compare?
Also, absolutely, completely works. So we are actually kind of just, Kim was just giving us a breakdown of all of the work that she does in cultivating and collecting graphic novels and kind of the trends on what's going on sci-fi. And what I love in graphic novels, and what I love is that you mentioned this mix between graphic novels, folks who write prose, people who are coming in and stepping into this arena and doing their own original work. I think that's such a beautiful segue over to you, Sam, because you've done prose, you've been an editor, you've worked in the graphic novel space. You know, for folks who may not understand or may not like necessarily get the nuance between how different the constructions of these pieces are, you know, talk to us a little bit about your work, but also like how you've been able to shift and move and develop out in these different spaces, and any like stark differences you see, and why did you decide to go into the graphic novel space?
Definitely. Well, I decided to go into it as an editor because I was already an editor, and I was working primarily in science fiction and fantasy, so juggling a lot of very complex, nuanced stories, world building, mythology building, like very complex. And you know, I say this all the time now because now I make comics. And I started making them so I could be a better comics editor, that writing a book is so much easier because you don't have to, it sounds really elitist and very privileged, but you know, you're painting pictures with words. You're able to write more, to explain more, explain less. Yes, there is obviously a nuance between showing and telling, but when you get down to doing comics, you know, you're building out story by situations, by very pared down, by interactions. You know, in a novel, you can be very descriptive and you can really seat someone deeply in their mind in a story. But a comic, you really have to marry visual and text. What a lot of people don't realize from the comics editor's side is when you're overseeing a project and it's a creator, it's a writer and an artist, they both have different visions for maybe the same story. So having to work with more than one person to get their vision out, and also balancing, because it's not that the artist is more important than the writer. They both have to collaborate to get across what they're saying, which I found that to be a very big challenge when doing Gothic Tales of Haunted Futures, which is a follow-up anthology. Am I mirrored? I also just realized this. Am I backwards? Sorry.
No, it actually comes, you're fine. I'm reading it I don't know about the audience, but I can read it perfectly.
Okay, so this was a follow-up anthology. It was, they were all basically conceptual, so we didn't have any of the work beforehand. I was also the co-editor on the first one. You just pull it out of this pile. It's always a pile. Gothic Tales of Haunted Love, which was the original. So we just had a theme, and then we invited people to pitch, and then we selected based on pitches and teams, and nothing was created yet. And then we said, yes, sure, that sounds like it fits. And after they were funded on Kickstarter, we went into the creative process. On the first one, I had a co-editor, but on this one, I was solo. So I was overseeing scripts, thumbs, pencils, everything, and concepts from nothing to this book, which is now finished, and walking every single person and creator, and there's over 34 creators that were involved in this, through. And it's a challenge on every single story. You have an approach to bringing these stories to life. As a writer, as a novel writer, it's very isolated, it's very personal. And then when you're working with teams and they're looking to you for guidance to get their vision out, and I know I'm just rambling now.
Well, the great thing about these projects and what I hope that folks are getting across is that when you're dealing with the medium of graphic novels, when you're dealing with the medium of comic books, when you're dealing in animation, it's a team process, right? But it also is this process that brings about this beautiful piece that's both visual and written and really touches people in a very different way. And actually, Sam, I think that's a great segue over to Jay, who has done so many cool, accessible things. Personally, Teen Titans, I just get geeked, because for me, these are really seminal pieces for a lot of young folk, but you've also done your own independent work, right? You've done this for 15 years. That is not easy. It is long days and long hours, but for you, why did you choose this medium, and how do you feel it does create accessibility for folks who want to get into this space?
I tell this story all the time. People ask me, what was your first published work, or when did you get started in comics? And the fact of the matter is, it started in the 3rd grade. And I wrote and drew my own little comic strip. I'm sure it was pretty terrible. I don't remember it at all. My mom never kept it. That's how great it was. But the reaction to that comic strip published in the school paper was so positive and so enthusiastic that I think it planted a seed in my head. This is something that I wanted to pursue, something I wanted to do. Of course, grade 3, you're not thinking about careers or anything. You're just thinking about, I did something people like, so maybe I'll keep doing it. And that's basically what I did. I just kept doing it. And the reason why I made a comic strip is because I grew up reading comics. My dad was a comic book reader. Used to read the Sunday paper and the daily comics before I had my own allowance and I was able to go buy comic books. And I grew up in Montreal, where we had, I went to English school, but we had to study French. But my French teacher, one of my French teachers, Mr. Ricci, love him, kind of encouraged us to read French graphic novels. So Tintin, Lucky Luke, Asterix, that sort of thing. So all my life, I was already gravitating towards comics, but people around me were encouraging of it, or at least they weren't discouraging of it. So this is why I wanted to pursue it as a career. I love storytelling of all kinds, but this is the one thing I guess that really spoke to me the most. It's my first love. I've worked in animation, I've worked in television, but comics are my first love. So that's where I'm coming from. And in terms of accessibility and what it does, I've already mentioned, this is what, it made me a reader. It made me want to create. And I think I've seen myself, it does that for a lot of kids, not just, kids that are in my orbit, my kids, my nephews and nieces, but I've done a lot of school visits and library visits and that sort of thing. And almost every single time I do a Q&A, there's 1 or 2 kids who don't ask a question, but instead they hold up, hey, look, I made this. This is my comic. And that's great. There's no question, but that's fine. And I just say that's amazing. I mean, that's what I did, and I encourage it. And yeah, so I think that's the power of the comic book.
And I love that. And so, Ronald, I was introduced to your work for the first time over Instagram. I won't even lie. I am a fan of everyone on this panel, but your work really marries this power of statement and art. And I love that, from the colors you decide to use to the quotes that you've used to across the board. You could have decided to do anything. What has been the motivation for you in your original work? And have you seen, how has the impact been? Like, is this something where you're like, oh yeah, I put it out there and it's great, and it's just for me? Or is there a particular motivation specifically in promoting so many amazing people of color, particularly Black people, in your work?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all. I mean, I'm glad the work is, impacted you. I don't know. I guess the question is one of like a motivation, or more regarding like how I react to, was it like,
I think it could be either intention, like did you set out and be like, this is what I want to do, this is the impact I want to make, or did you like, I'm going to create art, and if it impacts, then great. And and then there's the secondary question, what has been the impact you've seen?
I don't think I had any sort of a grand design. I think if I had a grand design, it was mostly just the impulse to continue to do what I want to do, like to create things and produce things. And then maybe, as I go along, like different things would happen. So like, okay, well, putting these certain people in the story, it's just a matter of like, well, who did I want to see in the story? Like, what did I want to tell? Or, what did I want to respond to? In the case of like political messages, like any of those didactic cartoons that I did, like, or essays, they sometimes they came from maybe just like a frustration, and often like they came from, I don't know when I first started to do them. In the case of the nib, I feel like, to be honest, like, or like Lighten Up, it was something that, I don't know, I've thought a lot about it, and I've wondered how much of it was either it was an interesting problem to solve, but maybe some of it was not, like, maybe it was a bunch of different things, like being frustrated about a particular situation, or while at the same time intrigued by like a formal problem, like using certain formats or colors, while also, maybe, I'm not gonna lie, maybe performing a bit for like a bit of an academic, or like a gaze that, like, so for instance, Lighten Up, I didn't really it's like I was kind of interested in the comic, but it was for the nib, like, and even for, I remember when I started out, like I did the Black History quotes, that was for the nib too, and so I did 6, and then I did some extra ones for Instagram, because I was like, well, this isn't quite as balanced as I'd like, so I added, and then I did some more. I did I think for the whole of Black History Month, maybe I put out like a few a week, maybe like 3 a week, because it's 3 rows.
And I love that, because here's one of the things for folks who don't know about Lighten Up, and Ronald, I'll be like, people send this to me all the time. I've sent it to other folks, and the importance of Lighten Up for a lot of people is this concept of what does it mean to utilize color for representation. At least that's how it came off to me. Have you seen what have you seen? Have you seen anyone do any reaction to this? Like, have you seen any change? Because it is really important when you look at this idea of Lighten Up, and you look at this idea of what is the color palettes, what does that look like, particularly for folks who understand comic book lore and understand that the first Marvel comic book character was supposed to be black. They didn't make him black. They thought it was an accident. And then they didn't have the brown color to put Gabe Jones in brown. They made him gray.
Yeah.
So, you know, the impact of this for a lot of folks who do that kind of study is pretty, it's pretty profound.
Yeah, I don't know. I got to be honest, I'm pretty ambivalent about that cartoon because I don't feel like I don't know. I at the end of it's funny because I was talking to Jessica Abel about this just yesterday. I feel, you know, I don't know, like I guess maybe that cartoon represented for me a turning point regarding like intent or explicit intent in work, where I think I've just let go what meaning or what impact the cartoon has on someone. Because I do feel that the vast majority of people I talk to about that cartoon didn't get the point of the cartoon that I intended, you know? So I've just kind of like at this point, I let it go. And I sometimes wonder like the work that gets done, often I think the political work that aesthetics do, cartoons, movies, whatever, like the most work is done in a way that isn't necessarily even perceived by the audience as the intent of the work, you know? So like I made a joke on Twitter that like I'm envious of how effective a political tool Marvel Comics can be, you know? And it's and it has more to do with a lot of the subtle messages that the actual materiality of it get across, like the spectacles in the comics, like the things that they're talking about, the things that they're saying about power and the application of power, you know?
But I think that's a really good point to everybody who's on this panel, right? Like, as storytellers, there's power in just telling the story, in that being there, even if it's not fully taken as the intention, right? Like, from seeing a person who is of color in different aspects to seeing a story that people can relate to, even if they don't know that's the reason. And I think I have so much profound respect for folks who do write, who are cartoonists, who do put themselves into it, even if there's not a grand design, as you said, or a master plan, because the representation still exists, even if it's an ideology, or it's the possibility of a thing, and it's not always perfect. But I think it is definitely out there. And what I think I want to toss out one more question before we go to Q&A. And sorry for cutting you off, Ronald. I know we are getting very close to our Q&A. If you, particularly, you know, the writers and the editors here, if you could tell yourself, and I think Jay, we kind of covered this, but if you could tell your younger self, you know, any piece of advice, or you could, you know, introduce your younger self to a piece of work, what would it be? And I'd actually love to start off with Sam.
Yeah, man, that's tough. What would I tell my younger self? The comic that I make, Krampus is my boyfriend, the main character is fat and very unabashedly so, and it is kind of the catalyst reason for why she ends up summoning Krampus, and it's just this whole thing. And I was fat when I was younger, and I did not see any media at all of anything that I was really into with characters that were representative of actual body types, of diverse just people, and that really sucked for me. So that is why I make my comic. But I mean, I really liked Faith, and I really, you know, I basically wish that I could tell my younger self that there is a wide variety of stuff out there that isn't just status quo, and you are worthy of being being in these stories, and it's the same for any of any of my readers. Yeah, and especially like LGBTQ representation. I'm bi, and I it's funny, being put on the spot, and like in 10 minutes I'll be able to list off all of these things that I wish that I could have just sent over to my younger self. But I mean, what's really great that you spoke about, Angélique, is that there are more of those comics now, and there is like a wider variety of media representation, and that's so super important that kids see themselves in those things, because it affects how they deal with reality. Because if your reality is so skewed by golden age comics with just unrealistic body types and completely white, straight character casts, that's what kids are only going to think exist out in the world. And it's obviously not true. So I just wish that, I guess, 20 some years ago, that I had met a librarian or someone else in comics or who just was widely read, who is just like, here's, Ursula Le Guin, and here's all these other creators and all these other stories that aren't just super basic.
Shay, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just sort of continuing along the same train of thought. I don't know if there's a specific work that I would, tell myself to read, but certainly I would encourage myself to look for work that wasn't so the same as everything else that you've already read, and in specifically work from other people, from other nations, other cultures. If I look back at all the stuff that I read, I mean, predominantly American work, comic books, for example, and in terms of any kind of novels or any fiction, science fiction or otherwise, it was all with white heroes, and that was kind of the default as well. As a child, when I was creating stuff, it took me a while to figure out, why was I defaulting to Chris Evans as the hero of all my stories as a child, right? And the funny thing is, even later on in life, when I thought, oh, you know what, maybe I shouldn't default to the male hero, then I would create these female characters, and they also were Caucasian, and the people of color were sidekicks, or so, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't, no one trained me to do this, but because this is what I was exposed to as a child, it kind of seeped into me and out of me at the same time. So if anything, I think I would encourage my young self to just look. Hardy Boys are great, but I'm sure there's stuff from Japan, the Philippines, China, Mexico, Colombia, that you could get into. And I did look for that stuff when I eventually, right? Work from other cultures, work by other people. And it's interesting because this is something that we're going to be talking a lot about tomorrow in my panel, Kids Like Us, which is about BIPOC stories for kids. So I don't want to step on my own toes too much, but yeah, no specific work, but certainly I would ask myself to get outside of that box.
Yeah. Ronald?
I probably, something that I wish I had read, it's not even it's just an essay that Bertolt Brecht did called Telling the Truth, 5 Difficulties. I probably would give that to myself. Someone, when I was in college, I was reading Adbusters and, all of these magazines, and I probably would have given myself that, just to give myself a bit of a way of thinking about how to use art, or to use aesthetics in general to in the service of truth, and not necessarily and giving it as a package, but giving people or cultivating the tools in the people you're communicating with to kind of discern and find and locate the truth, whether in my work or someone else's work or in general. I think that's something I wish I had read a little bit earlier. It's been years, but I wish I had read it when, I was a kid.
I love that. So, Tim, I want to twist the question around a little bit because you are a person who is cultivating and gathering and reading and categorizing a lot of the work that our other panelists are doing, and these different works from different places. How does that understanding, particularly you have, and being a fan, but also being a librarian, shift the perspective when doing your work and how you highlight and what you bring into the collection, and even searching for new pieces to bring in the collection, and what is like the key priority in the pieces that you bring into the collection?
Well, I'm actually not the right person to ask that. I'm not involved in the acquisition, sadly. But I can certainly address how we highlight the material once we have it. We do try and get a broad spectrum of things, and I will also say we have a caveat that we collect primarily adult material, and we don't get everything. So there are some things out there that we just don't get, that I can't address. But in terms of highlighting, we do exhibits, and we always try and bring in a graphic novel component. It's much more dynamic if we have a graphic novel that is of an appropriate subject. I did an exhibit on politics and science fiction, so I was able to bring in some graphic novels on authoritarianism, dictatorships, etc. We also do, as I mentioned, we do the class visits, and we do basically 3 kinds of class visits. I'll do a general history of science fiction, and which of course then the graphic novels feed kind of very naturally into that. Another one that we might do is actually for what used to be called library school or iSchool, or any of the library training programs, where they want to know how we process things. But the one that I find most exciting, the 2 kinds, we do an art class visit, very heavily focused on the graphic novels, and also some special education classes, and where we talk about how graphic novels can tell stories in different ways. And I've had people say, oh, I guess graphic novels are a little easier to read, and Sam kind of addressed this. It's like, no, they're not easier at all. You have to read the text, you have to read the pictures, and you can read them different ways. So with the graphic novels, they can play around with formats. So a graphic novel can be read from front to back or from back to front, which completely reverses the story. Or in one case, one of my favorite books is called Nogi Gone, and it's by the Belgian team of the Scoyton brothers, and it's a palindrome. So at the middle of the book, the entire story starts to reverse, but the whole thing has a complete story arc. And not only the way they've told it, it's not only the action that reverses, it's the actual emotional content which reverses, and it can only really be told in a graphic novel format. And so it brings different ways of storytelling to children, and challenges them to tell stories in different ways too.
I love that. And please don't mind me going on mute. I'm in LA, and there are a lot of helicopters going on. So if you hear them in the background, I am so sorry. It is an LA thing. But I love that. And we actually have a couple of questions that have come in on the Q&A. And I love this. One is from Megan Thompson. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi.
All good. I'm just switching over to Q&A because
Sure.
I'm a little distracted by the helicopter traffic, and I'm trying to stay the course. But Megan asked a question, and I'm happy to read it out loud.
Sure.
I got it up. I fell in love with sci-fi as a kid because it explores what it really means to be human by showing non-human intelligences or human minds in a non-human environment. We play with such aspects of our cultures and beliefs from our sentience, and which result in our animal natures. What part of human nature are you interested in expressing in your work? That's really actually very interesting. So when looking at sci-fi, understanding the personification of things that, bring out our humanness, even when we're talking about robots, Jay, or we're talking about sentient or AI. I'd love to toss this to Jay first, and then anyone else can kind of jump on in.
I was just going to say, we were talking about androids and robots earlier, and I think one of the big themes in not only my work, but the work that the stuff that I like to read involves empathy and community and family, and just like the human need for a connection and other people to be part of your life, and reaching out for that and looking for that. Something I'm working on with my eldest child, who could use a little bit of could learn a little bit of empathy for other people, and that's something that's in a lot of my work for younger readers. And I think that's where my love of robots and AI comes from, because they're learning how to be human, and that's a big part of human connection and empathy and feelings and emotion.
Does anybody else want to jump in on that one? Please feel free on this question.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested. I'm interested, particularly like right now, super interested in science fiction or fiction in general, problematizing, right, the notion of humanity anyway, like altogether, and like how it relates to the natural world. Like I think I think like robot comes, like the word itself comes from like a Czech play from like the early 20th century. And I think it's analogous to like slave. So like I like the idea of, I've been thinking a lot about how robots more often than not aren't really a matter of us making something wholly non-biological, but like that we've made people into robots long before we had like plastic or metal. I like the notion of what are the things that we take for granted of this kind of like the formulation of what it means to be human, coming out of the age of enlightenment. Like I like to kind of ask questions of that and think about, is it, how useful it is, what's good about it, what's bad about it, what sort of historical things we take for granted as being primordial, a primordial quality of being Homo sapien, right? But like not necessarily primordial, right? Like I'm into that type of stuff for sure. And I think science fiction has that quality, something like, intentionally or unintentionally, something like X-Men probably raises questions like that. Even historical fiction could raise questions like that. Yeah. So that's what I'm. that's what like really excites me about that. It's like, what about like what is it with like an elephant getting granted personhood? The sort of ethical, the morality of zoos, things like that. I find super fascinating. I think science fiction does a great job on that, like Planet of the Apes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and also one of my favorite franchises ever, because you look at that dichotomy of what happens when the roles get reversed, what happens when humanity isn't humanity, and then you seek humanness through literally another type of sentient being. Sam, did you have anything to add?
It's really hard to follow that up. But one thing that I encountered and encouraged in our anthology, Gothic Tales of Haunted Futures, was the importance of permanence and impermanence, especially when you're looking at robots and artificial intelligence as being beyond human, but if they can last forever, does the way that they perceive the world and perceive relationships and connections change? Because they can never end, and what happens if they do end, and do they end? So that's something that I really love playing with, and death. Just straight up death is so fascinating to me. as part of human nature, and completely embracing it, not shying away from it. And if you're an artificial intelligence, what does death mean to you? So.
I mean, yeah. We actually have a specific question for Kim. Hello, Kim. How can I book a visit with you guys? I run an elementary school in Oakville, and those sessions sound amazing.
Okay, well, I will say that really our bottom limit is about grade 7. We have some material for younger age groups, but we really do focus on grade 7 up to university level. It would really depend on the school, really, and but you can email us, and we're at LS. S is in Sam for Lillian Smith, LSME staff. Do I have the right one there? Actually, just go to the tpl.ca.
And I'm sure we can get that typed. I'm sure we can get that typed in the chat for everybody too.
Because I rarely email ourselves, so but if you go to tpl.ca and you can get to our website, and it'll have the phone number and the contact information there.
Yep, it's already. Yep, they got it. They've already taken care of it. It's already in the chat for everybody.
Okay.
Last question. They asked you, Kim, if you could restate the name of the graphic novel that was the palindrome for them.
Oh, where did I put it? It is. Once again, my mirror, and I don't know, no Gone, because it reads the same backwards as forwards. And it just also brings in this beautiful European sensibility in terms of the art style. It's very different than what we have been used to in North America. But Nogegon.
Awesome. And Lindsay has also put that in the chat for those who are watching the panel right now. So as kind of we're closing out, if you have any more questions, please make sure you put them in the question and answer. I will try to get to as many of them as possible. I also kind of just want to throw out, this is a very simple question, but, I kind of want to start with Ronald. Why do you love doing this work? You could be doing anything else and being a storyteller, but in specific, everybody on this panel has a passion for doing the work that they're doing and bringing it to life, and specifically clearly has a love of sci-fi. And so I'm just always interested in, when the days are long, when the page is not coming out the way you want it to come out, when the revisions come through, when the editor has said a thing to you that you're like, I don't know what you're asking me to do. What is the thing that you remind yourself, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing? Besides rent, because that's clearly, I just want to get that out of the way. Besides rent.
Well, it's not always the best way to make rent.
No.
I think I'm a nonpartisan, really. Like, I don't think there's anything particularly, I'm not like, oh, wow, I've got to do comics more than I do any of the other things that I do. I think it's a matter of like what tools I have at hand. I think comics wins out a lot of times because practically, I have all the tools I need to make a comic. I don't really, the social aspect could really just be me and my friends and sharing it. It's like I don't need to get a budget approved. It's a really, in its most simple way, I can, before the iPhone, it's like now you can make a movie on your iPhone or whatever, right? Like, and still though, the iPhone is expensive. You know what I mean? Like, back in the day, if you just had some paper and some pencils and pens, like you can make comics, so like, I would say that's why, everything, there's a lot of great things particular to the medium of comics, like, sort of formal constraints and things, but like, I think every medium has that, it's like music or, film, animation, everything has, every particular medium has it, I think. So first of all, I say I'm not particularly like comics. I'm not like some sort of comics zealot, but the quality, like being able to produce it with just, it's like the soccer of art mediums. You know what I mean? It's like you just really, all you need is a pencil and all you need is an object, a mark making object, or maybe not even that. Like comics has like it's pretty, it's very versatile, and it's I think that's what makes it win out in the end as a storytelling medium, for me, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. 100%. Jay?
Yeah, like as I was saying earlier, it's a storytelling medium. It's a language. It's an art that spoke to me very early on as a child, and I think I was just inspired to want to do the same as the creators that inspired me, emulate them as storytellers. And I just love the medium. I just do. So I'm happy to be able to do this for a living.
And Sam, I mean, you also do, again, you do prose and all these other things. So,
And I make a webcomic, which is a very recent thing, the last 2 years. But yeah, I mean, the way that I write novels in my mind is very visual. So I always describe it as I'm just transcribing in prose what I see in my mind. So like comics are perfect marriage of that. And being able to do it is insane. And when I started, I was not very good. But I was really, really wanted to tell this story and tell it in this way, kind of like Jay said, like all the people and all the comics and the manga that I consumed when I was young. And I was inspired by that, and I really wanted to do it too. And then when you step back and you see this body of work that you've created, and you're just, part of you like went into a fugue state when you made it. So when you look at a full finished book, you're like, I don't even remember doing this. And it's just so exciting. And as a creator, you're always changing, and the way that you tell stories is always influenced so sharply by your lived experience. And it is magic doing it. And it's a privilege to be able to do it, but also like Ronald said, you could tell a story with nothing. You can make a comic with cutouts of a magazine. Like you can tell a story. It just matters how, like, that you get it out. That's the most important part.
That was absolutely perfect, and a great way to give you all my last question, which is, can everyone tell us where to find you, your work, anything that you want to give, Twitter, Instagram, website, and we'll start off with you, Kim. I know we've already laid out a couple of them, but if you have anything else to add, let us know.
That's pretty much it. We're pretty old school at this point. We will be working on some other platforms, but the website and our phone is there as well, and that's the best way to contact us, through the website or by phone.
Ronald?
Yeah, I'm good at hiding from people. You can find Lab Magazine on beehivebooks.com, I believe. And my works are pretty easy to find. I'm at ronaldwimberly.com, and I'm at Ronald Wimberly on Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm J Torres Comics, basically all across the internets. jtorrescomics.com, on Facebook, Twitter, when I'm on there, and Instagram.
And last but not least, Sam.
My website is smbiko.com, which links to everything and everywhere that I am on the internet. And my webcomic is Krampus is My Boyfriend, which is available for free via the Webtoon app.
Love it. I want to thank each and every one of you. And obviously, I want to thank TCAF for having us. This was an amazing conversation. Thanks for rolling with the punches and answering the Q&A and dealing with helicopter traffic in LA. Y'all are all absolutely amazing, and I hope folks check out all of your incredible work.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Angélique, Ronald, Jay, SM, and Kim for being with us today. This session was recorded and all of our sessions will be available on TCAF's YouTube later. We will email all our attendees the links when they're available. So please take a break, stretch your legs, get a breath of fresh air, and we'll get back here in 15 minutes for our graphic medicine panel.